Computer-generated imagery, most commonly known as CGI, has taken the world by storm, and we're not only talking about comic book films. CGI has been used to enhance the art of filmmaking, and despite the benefits of this technique, it does cause issues for some actors. It's hard to work on a green screen all day, but those aren't the issues we're looking into. Get ready for some CGI moments you probably never even knew about. What do you think about CGI in films? Are they using it too much today? Sound off in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Screen Rant and join our notification squad. Here is Screen Rant's list of 10 CGI movie effects that made actors uncomfortable.
Welcome home, Peter.
Guardians of the Galaxy. The director of Guardians of the Galaxy, James Gunn, has a secret weapon in the form of his brother, Sean Gunn. Sean Gunn played the hilarious Kirk Gleason on the beloved TV show Gilmore Girls, and actually portrays two characters in Guardians of the Galaxy. One was Kraglin, the sidekick to Yondu, and the other you probably wouldn't guess. He played Rocket Raccoon. No, not the voice, that was Bradley Cooper, but he was the stand-in for the genetically altered bounty hunter Raccoon. He might be used to playing comedy roles, but not being petted on set or treated like a little furball. It made for some weird stories, but a great performance. Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Continuing the epic space opera that George Lucas brought to life in 1977, Walt Disney Studios released Rogue One, a Star Wars story in 2016 with much delight. One aspect of the film that wowed or annoyed viewers was the CGI portrayals of Peter Cushing and Carrie Fisher. English actor Guy Henry portrayed Cushing during filming, and then his face was changed to look like Grand Moff Tarkin with CGI. Henry was afraid to let the movie down, and even said that the process was frightening. We think he nailed the performance of Cushing, not to mention that voice. Les Miserables. The director of 2012's Les Miserables felt that most musicals do a bad job of relaying true singing performances during films, because the actors don't usually sing when they film. The final songs are added in post, as the actors sing to a recording during production. But to get great sounding vocals during a song, microphones need to be close to the actors. The director wanted to record his actors live, so he had microphones and wires in every singing scene, making it difficult for the actors to move on set. The wires and mics were removed with CGI in post, but sadly not Russell Crowe's singing voice.
Off his feet.
Avengers: Age of Ultron. During filming of Avengers: Age of Ultron, Scarlett Johansson was pregnant and had to rely on her team of stunt women to stand in for her during many scenes. She even filmed numerous scenes before the other actors even arrived on set, before her growing baby bump was too noticeable. Still, her belly was showing in many scenes, and they had to remove it with CGI. Several times, her face was CGI'd onto her stunt doubles, and watching the film made Johansson feel awkward. She enjoys getting her hands dirty and working with weapons, so watching someone else do it with her face was not ideal for the actress. That's okay though, she has other Marvel films to show off her skills.
I'm your hairy dog father. Fairy godmother.
Cinderella. When the trailer for 2015's Cinderella was released, speculation about Lily James's waistline being slimmed down with CGI immediately started. James quickly told the world that her waistline was not altered, but embarrassedly revealed one feature of her body that was, her feet. She described them as ugly, and was glad they used CGI to enhance her glass slipper wearing feet, but was hoping to keep it on the down low. Looks like her fairy godmother used a little bippity-boppity-boo to enhance her figure anyways, but not in the way that audience members thought.
I look like my great Aunt Tessie. Smell like my great Aunt Tessie.
The Harry Potter franchise. Some of the best scenes in the Harry Potter franchise are during their Quidditch games, simply because every time we watch it, we want to join in on the fun. Actor Rupert Grint, who portrayed Ron Weasley, wasn't as excited to join in on the flying fun. To film these CGI-heavy scenes, the actors were placed 30 feet in the air, and balls were thrown at them. This might sound like fun to some of us, but when you're afraid of heights, it isn't a cup full of butterbeer. Grint nonetheless persisted, and even saved the big game.
When you get to hell, John, tell him Daisy sent you.
The Hateful Eight. This is one that made the actors on set of one film miserable because of bad CGI in another film. In the film The Social Network, there is a poorly produced CGI scene when the actors are cold and you can see their CGI breath. Quentin Tarantino hated that scene so much that he made his actors work on a refrigerated set that was 30 degrees Fahrenheit every day during the filming of The Hateful Eight. Tarantino has been known for keeping it real on set, so his actors knew what they were getting into, but probably had their assistants making numerous coffee runs. Networks.
If you guys were the inventors of Facebook, you'd have invented Facebook.
The Social Network. Speaking of The Social Network, it's hard to imagine that a movie can make a horrible CGI effect like Cold Breath that we just mentioned, and then convince the masses with another effect. The Winklevoss twins in the film are actually not twins. The face of one actor, Armie Hammer, was put onto the face of the other actor, Josh Pence, to give the illusion of twins. Pence was disheartened during production, because he was getting his big break in a David Fincher film and no one would ever see him.
I don't have the strength to stay away from you anymore.
Twilight. Hate it or love it, you have to admit that a lot of people are fans of the Twilight movies, not to mention the best-selling books. One scene you might remember from the movie is when the pale-skinned Cullens decide to take Kristen Stewart out for a family-friendly baseball game that turns bad quickly. The family played with no gloves, so when they were practicing this scene with real baseballs, their hands were obviously in pain. The crew decided to use clear plastic Christmas ornaments in place of actual baseballs to keep their actors from bruising. Then they would replace the ornaments with CGI balls in post. They can withstand hundreds of years of high school but not a few baseball bruises? Canada! Deadpool. If you haven't seen Deadpool yet, you just aren't living. Despite its R rating, teens from every spectrum have watched and loved this film. Its star, Ryan Reynolds, had a tough time getting the film made, and once shooting started, he even had a few bumps and bruises to achieve the violence he wanted. With all these painful scenes, he still didn't have it as bad as the stand-in actor for Colossus. It actually took 5 actors to portray the character of Colossus, so while it's Stefan Kapisik's voice you hear in the movie, it's actually André Tricoteur who was used on set in a motion capture performance. The part that got tricky for Tricoteur was the platform shoes he had to act in, which caused him a lot of grief and stumbles during his performance. Stranger Things. Arguably the biggest hit in recent memory, Stranger Things was the talk of the town for months, and for good reason. An interesting mix of 80s kitsch spun with futuristic panache made for one heck of an entertaining ride. The showrunners wanted to keep as many of the effects as practical as possible, and sprinkle a little CG in only when necessary. But for those of you hoping to go as the Demogorgon for Halloween, you should know that it was created using a mix of animatronics and CGI, so you should probably get started on that costume now. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. 2016's Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them stars Eddie Redmayne as everyone's favorite magizoologist. The creation of all those magical creatures obviously took a little computer wizardry, but apparently so did everything else. A ton of the environments were digitally rendered, leaving poor Eddie Redmayne to act his heart out in a concrete box most of the time.
Don't just stand there, come in.
Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Based on the book of the same name, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children is visually stunning. And if the movie's highly stylized, sort of creepy aesthetic feels familiar, that's because it was directed by Tim Burton. But even though it's tempting to get lost in Ava Green's eyes for 2 hours and 7 minutes, this is one you actually have to pay attention to, because there's like time travel and stuff.
That's absolutely true. There are very few things I can't explain.
There's also a plethora of underwater scenes that would have been totally unsafe to film in real life. But since we live in the future, the VFX people were able to mix in the actors' swimming footage with the creepy environment. 100% safe.
Okay, let's pro-con this superhero thing.
Deadpool. Since the Merc with a Mouth is a Marvel character, fans were expecting a little bit of crossover between properties, and it doesn't take too long for a couple of X-Men to show up. Now obviously, Colossus's appearance was helped along by CGI. And while the actor underneath was tall to begin with, he also wore 6-inch platform boots to make himself even larger. It doesn't look as cool as it sounds. Suicide Squad. If you only watched the press coverage, you might think it was the worst movie ever made. And while some of the CGI usage was out of control, it also caused a bit of a stir. 2 photos of Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn costume hit the internet and concerned citizens cried foul. One version has the character's short shorts really short, while the other just shows them a regular amount of short. People were quick to assume they were made tinier in post, but more than one Screen Ranter thinks it might have been the other way around, and the CGI was in the interest of modesty. Furious 7. The Fast and the Furious franchise is among the most profitable in history. It's right up there with Star Wars, Harry Potter, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The movies have everything: fast cars, big explosions, and rappers turned actors. But the crew were rocked by tragedy when star Paul Walker passed away in 2013. And while the majority of the actors' scenes were filmed for the next installment, they weren't quite done. Walker's brothers Cody and Caleb were used as stand-ins, and the FX department mapped Paul's face onto theirs. X-Men Apocalypse. After his insane debut in Days of Future Past, Quicksilver was back for X-Men Apocalypse in 2016. The fan favorite continues to be a literal showstopper, whipping around the scenes with ease. But for the filmmakers, achieving this effect was the opposite of easy. First, production needed to use a phantom camera, a special rig capable of shooting 3,000 frames per second. Then, they strapped it to a dolly and sent it flying across a track at 90 miles per hour to achieve the practical side of the effect. Guardians of the Galaxy. There is so much CGI in Guardians of the Galaxy that we almost don't know where to begin. Since two of the main cast are entirely computer generated, crew members wore shirts with the characters' faces on them. The idea was that Chris Pratt and the rest of the actors would have some sense of where they should be looking, and technically it worked. But when you realize their job description included yelling at a grown man's lower back while running around a spaceship, you can appreciate the straight-faced performances even more. Mad Max Fury Road. Director George Miller is old school. Given the choice between practical and digital effects, his preference is clear. And some fans argue that one of the most interesting things about 2015's Mad Max Fury Road is how sparse the CGI is. Things that seem like they'd be computer generated, like say super dangerous death-defying stunt work, actually happened for real. Production was so plagued with delays that the stunt team had more time than usual to practice their routines. So when it came time to film the scenes, they went above and beyond. The film is guilty of a small amount of post-production manipulation, but it's definitely not as much as you think. Game of Thrones. 3 jewels in Game of Thrones' crown come in the form of Daenerys Targaryen's feisty dragons. And while the show constantly has us questioning everything we think we know, we're still pretty sure dragons don't exist. So what's a Khaleesi to do? The real answer isn't nearly as glamorous. Actress Emilia Clarke is interacting with a fancy ball on a stick, so that she knows where she's supposed to be looking. Suicide Squad. 2016's Suicide Squad has certainly received its fair share of criticism. For some, underdeveloped characters, unnecessarily tangled storylines, and studio meddling were all to blame, while others just sat back and enjoyed the ride. There's another critique that appears occasionally, and it has everything to do with the film's climactic battle. Opponents argue that the heavy reliance on CGI actually takes away from the scene.
Hey, everyone can see all this trippy magic stuff, right?
The action is barely visible, and because of the framing, it's impossible to establish any kind of perspective. Audiences are led to believe it's a huge battle, and it's built up as such, but for many, the scene just didn't deliver.
Oh no.
X-Men Apocalypse. Oscar Isaac is everywhere these days, but unless you checked his IMDb page beforehand, you might watch X-Men Apocalypse and miss his performance entirely. Apocalypse is an insanely strong mutant, and a fixture to be feared in the X-Men canon. Both digital and practical effects were used to achieve the character's appearance. And as a result of the layering, some people argue that the actor's performance was totally lost in a sea of blue prosthetics. Considering all the talent Isaac brings to the table, that sounds like a damn shame. World War Z. When it comes to comparing the World War Z movie to the book of the same name, it's obvious that the only thing they share is a title. The entire narrative structure, geography, and major plot points are completely different. And when it comes to the zombies themselves, the big screen adaptation fails hard. The swirling computer-generated mass of phony walkers scaling the Jerusalem wall is particularly hard to watch. With the graphics quality of a late 90s video game, the scene falls totally flat, taking all the suspense with it. If only we could just blow on the cartridge and try again.
It's crazy.
Return of the Jedi. There's an old saying that goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And when George Lucas was fiddling around with the Star Wars special editions, he would have done well to remember that. Lucas made all sorts of changes behind the scenes.
What did he say?
And dedicated fans can spot every single one of them. But one that's easy for everyone to recognize happens in Return of the Jedi.
It won't be easy for you to hear it, but you must.
In the middle of the Jedi rock scene, two very obvious CG characters appear that don't blend in with the background at all. In fact, there's even a few close-ups. Let this be a lesson to us all. Don't mess with perfection. Guardians of the Galaxy. On paper, Thanos is one of the most intimidating big bads in comic book history. Yeah, he was born deformed, but it's what's on the inside that counts. He's crazy smart, extra super powered, and has a gauntlet full of gems that literally lets him control everything everywhere all the time. How the hell are you even supposed to beat something like that? Seriously. While fans who are in the know can appreciate how spine-chilling the character is supposed to be, anyone basing their opinion off of his big screen appearance might come away with a different impression. He's not very intimidating, and it's kind of hard to take him seriously. Jurassic World. As we've heard once or twice before, with great power comes great responsibility. And adding on to an iconic property like Jurassic Park is not a task to be taken lightly. There are precious childhood memories at risk, reminders of a simpler time.
Must go faster.
So when the highly anticipated Jurassic World was released in 2015, we all held our collective breath. It opened to mixed reviews, and one of the biggest complaints was about the CGI. For many filmmakers, the age of animatronics is over and digital effects reign supreme. Being released 22 years after the original, audiences anticipated visuals even more convincing than they'd already seen, and a lot of them were let down by the spectacle.
That is one big pile of
The Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2. It's a movie-making fact that those who sign up to work alongside young children are almost guaranteed to have a bad time. If a baby wants to cry, it's gonna cry. But thanks to advances in technology, the Twilight team was able to take a shortcut.
It's true.
Instead of using a real one, they just CG'd one of those suckers in there and prayed for the best. Renesmee is strange looking, even for a vampire hybrid.
Artifice.
But still, even though she was entirely digital, the infant actually gave the best performance in the entire movie. X-Men Origins Wolverine. If nothing else, Wolverine is supposed to be badass.
You wanna get out of my way?
Everyone knows that mutants who fight with blades are just cooler than ones who don't. It's science. And with the exception of a few scenes from 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine, his claws generally live up to their pants-wetting reputation. In this movie, they're more than a little off. They're a perfect example of cartoonish CGI interfering with an otherwise pretty okay performance from Hugh Jackman. Thankfully, this installment in the franchise's history has been largely overshadowed by some other memorable moments. So if you forgot about this movie entirely, you're probably not alone. I Am Legend. I Am Legends does a great job of building tension. Revealing the story in bits and pieces is a great way to keep the audience engaged. If only the big surprise lived up to its epic foreshadowing. The antagonists are terrifying, until you actually see what they look like. Their rubbery faces were funnier than they were scary, and effectively undid all the hard work from the first half of the movie. The scenario is unsettling. Imagine you were the last person alive, surrounded by infected who used to be your loved ones. Some really awesome special effects makeup would have done wonders here, but instead the filmmakers just had to show off. Green Lantern. When executed poorly, CGI can spoil the whole movie-going experience, regardless of who is in front of the camera. Take, for instance, the universally loved Ryan Reynolds. No conversation about ill-fated CGI decisions would be complete without mentioning 2011's Green Lantern. Computer-generated from tip to toe, Hal Jordan's suit was 100% fake and 200% ridiculous. It was so bad that when the actor suited up for last year's Deadpool, the filmmakers threw in a couple of jabs at his past work. Obviously, Reynolds was a good sport about it, and has even said that nobody hates Green Lantern's suit more than he does.
I can go all day, Dopinder. The point is, it's bad.
It's bad.
So what do you think of our list? Did we skip over any other CGI ruined performances?